Welcome everyone. This is a little talk on objects in family history. I'm going to be talking about three objects. Well, actually there were four. My grandfather, James Christie Russell, had two small silver cups that sat on my granny's dresser that he said he got for swimming the tea. My granny had a wooden box that was filled with family photos, and I remember as a child it also contained a Christmas card from the Lord Provost. And the final object is an object I knew about, but only when it was posted on the Dundee Museum's Facebook page did I actually get to see the object. This is my gran and grandpa in Whitehall Crescent in Dundee in about 1970. My grandfather, James Christie Russell, was born in Arbroath in 1906 and died in Dundee in 1976. My gran, Edith Fraser, was born in Fraserburgh in 1910 and died in 2003. Now, today's story really focuses on my grandfather, James Christie Russell. Like I said, my grandfather was born in Arbroath in 1906, and this is a picture of the family in Arbroath around 1915. My grandfather is the wee boy with the white collar, and in the back row, the man is my great-grandfather, also called James Christie Russell. I started my family history in 2009, and that's important. Well, it will be in a minute. And I've kept to the same system from the beginning. I use family sheets, one family sheet for each couple, and my computer folders mirror my paper folders. So at the top level of my computer folder, I have the couple's birth margins and death records and their family sheet. And then below that in folders, I have all the census materials and all the material relating to their children. Now this is couple 24 and 25, David Russell and Elizabeth Wallace Christie, who were the parents of my great-grandfather, James Christie Russell, who was born in Dundee in 1875. The couple had 7 children in total. Now by the early 1900s, 2 of the sons had left Dundee. George John Carnegie Russell, a ship's plater, had moved down to Birkenhead, where he married a woman called Agnes Lloyd and lived out the rest of his days, dying at the ripe old age of 91 in 1963. The other person was James Christie Russell, my great-grandfather, who moved to Arbroath with his family, and where my grandfather, also James Christie Russell, was born. Now, when I started my family history, I was so excited to find an advert in the Evening Telegraph for stamped eggs for James C. Russell, Stobswell Street, Dundee, and High Street, Arbroath. And this picture shows his a store he had in Dundee at Stobswell. Must have been the trams running there, so it's probably in the teens, and you can see his name above the door, James Christie Russell. That left 5 of the Russell children still in Dundee, and the 2 that will feature today are on the left-hand side. One is Georgina Millen Russell, she's the woman with the big white hat, and next to her is her brother, William Wallace Christie Russell. The other 3 are in the middle, Charlotte Easton Russell. She became a grocer and died in Dundee in 1953. Behind her is Isabel Coates Russell, who died young in 1915. She was a confectioner's assistant, like Georgina Millen was. And next to them on the far right is their brother, David Russell, who emigrated to Canada, Hamilton, Canada, and died out in Canada. Not long after that picture was taken, Georgina Millen Russell got married to a man called Archibald Powery, who was a ship's plater, the same occupation as her brother had been, the one who moved to Birkenhead. At the time, Georgina was a confectioner's assistant and living on Watson Street, and Archibald was living round the corner in Broughty Ferry Road in Dundee. Now, if you remember, I said I started my family history in 2009, and Georgina Millen Russell died in 1959. So when I started, her death certificate was not available to download on Scotland's People. I would have had to send away and order the certificate. And to be honest, she was a bit of an outlier, so I didn't bother. And it was only years later that I actually obtained her death certificate. And this is when bells started to ring, because Georgina Millen Powery, on her death certificate, it says, widow of Archibald Powery, ship plater. I knew that already, but in brackets, formerly Lord Provost of Dundee. Well, that got the bells ringing, of course, and then that's when I thought Archibald Powery must have been the man who sent the Christmas card to his nephew, James Christie Russell, my grandfather. This is Archibald Powery and Georgina Millen Russell in about 1946, when he was first appointed Lord Provost of Dundee. In 1946, Archibald Powery became Dundee's first socialist Lord Provost. But he was not a stranger to civic duty. He joined the town council in 1920 and had served almost continuously since then. He was an ex-magistrate. He'd held convenerships for cleansing, electricity, the swimming baths, housing. And in 1946, he'd been awarded an OBE in recognition of his wartime work when he was a liaison officer between the Civil Defence and the Home Guard. He was a member of a multitude of committees, which I won't list all of them. He had done his apprenticeship at Gourlay Brothers, and for about 36 plus years, he'd been a ship's plater at the Caledon shipyard. So all this time he's working both in the shipyard and for the council. Now, it also mentions Archibald's achievements as an athlete. He was a noted swimmer in his youth, and he had played international polo for Scotland, water polo that is, and he'd been capped against Ireland, Belgium and Holland. Now, I'm not sure if this tradition still goes on, but in the past, when you were elected Lord Provost of Dundee, there were 2 lampposts, ornate lampposts, erected outside your house. And these are the lampposts going up in front of 35 Kenilworth Avenue in Dundee, where Archibald Powery and Georgina Millen Russell lived. I just wonder if these are the only lampposts like that have gone up in front of a council house. Between 1947 and 1948, I doubt if Archibald Powery slept much. There are literally hundreds of newspaper articles where he's mentioned opening galas, attending this event, speaking at that event, and so on. In the top image here, he's at the opening of the new National Cash Register factory in Dundee. To his left is Sir Stafford Cripps, and to his right is the local MP Tom Cook. Where the men are saluting in the kilts, that's Archibald holding the flags for the 4th and 5th Black Watch. So both him and the Earl of Airlie are handing back the colours to the soldiers, which have been kept in the National Bank of Scotland since the beginning of the war. And in the other photograph, which I think is my favourite photograph of Archie, he's in black tie and tails here, and dancing at the Caird Hall. Still in 1947, this is Archie stood in the pouring rain opening the Blackshade housing scheme. He's standing at the door of a furnished exhibition house of one of the Air OH prefabs which were to be built. There were supposed to be 412 of them in total on this site. Nowadays in Dundee there's very few of these remaining. I think perhaps 3. One of those is on Balgowan Drive, which is shown in the picture here. In 1946, the then Lord Provost of Dundee, Sir Garnet Wilson, was invited to go to Orléans in France to be officially thanked for Dundee's help during the war. This was followed in 1947 by a return visit to Dundee by members of the Orléans City Council. In the photo on the right, at Glamis Castle, you'll see Dr. Pierre Chevalier, the Mayor of Orléans, and his wife. Then we have the Earl of Strathmore, the brother of the then Queen, and of course Lord Provost Powery and his wife, Georgina Millen Russell. Now at this point I probably should have looked at Archibald's swimming and polo career, but I found a number of articles about the launch of a ship in 1948. Now in one of the articles, Archibald said, "This is the proudest day in my wife's life." He was speaking after the launch by the Lady Provost of the 8,300-ton blue funnel liner, the Clytonius. Mrs. Powery said she'd been interested in ships since girlhood, and that during the summer months she carried her father's midday meal to the shipyard, and that in her wildest dreams she never thought it would be her privilege to send a ship like this down the slipway. She would follow the movements of the Clytonius with special interest, as her husband had helped in the construction of the masts and the rudder. So Archibald had still been working at the Caledon. This was the last ship he worked on before he left the Caledon and took up his post as the Lord Provost of Dundee. Now, as you can imagine, this incident was covered in a few local papers, and another one mentions the fact, that Archibald, early in his career, had spent some time in Montfalcon near Trieste, where he gave instruction in ship construction. So that was something else to follow up. And then I read this. Both the Lord Provost and the Lady Provost have connections with the shipbuilding for 3 generations, and therefore it is fitting that they should be united in this week's enterprise. That was the launching of the ship. The father of Mrs. Powery and the grandfather of the Lord Provost indeed both helped to build Scott's famous wooden Discovery, which was launched from the Panmure yard of the Dundee Shipbuilders Company in 1901. Well, when I read that, I thought I had joined Dundee royalty. Find My Past have a wonderful collection of free-to-view images, mainly of Dundee. And within the collection, there's a series about the building of the Discovery. This is, I think, the earliest one, which shows the boat in the very early stages of construction. And it looks like it's all carpenters involved. So I'm hoping Archibald Powery's grandfather, Andrew Powery, and Georgina Millen's father, David Russell, are somewhere in this photo. Now, initially, when I looked at the photo, I saw 2 or 3 men, but as you get your eye into the picture, there are at least 16 men I can see working on the boat at that time. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Discovery. It was launched in the March of 1901. The Dundee newspapers are full of information about the launch, etc., etc. But a few days after the launch, there was a little snippet about the Shetlands. And I'd recently listened to a man give a presentation about Shetland and how the whaling boats in Dundee would leave Dundee with a skeleton crew, go up to the Shetlands and pick up a crew there, because the men in Shetland were used to working in the ice for the whaling. And I thought it was interesting that the same happened with the Discovery. So they left Dundee with a basic crew and they picked up the men in Lerwick, and then instead of heading up to the Arctic, headed down to the Antarctic. Now, if you know about the Dundee Press, you know the Dundee Courier and Advertiser never put headlines on the front page. It was adverts. The world could be coming to an end, but it was adverts. So there was nothing on the front page about the Discovery's launch, but there was this. The Antarctic ship Discovery was launched from Panmure Shipyard yesterday. When you start on a voyage of discovery with the view of ascertaining whether gentlemen's tailoring is done best and cheapest in the city, select a central spot from which to begin your investigations. It's an ad for a tailor, which I thought was a bit strange, but not as strange as the ad above, because card Andrew Powrie, practical tailor, begs to intimate that he has started business at East Dock Buildings, foot of Trades Lane. Andrew Powrie. Well, it's not the grandfather, because he's the shipbuilder. So I looked down at the 1901 census, and there's Andrew Powrie, Archibald's grandfather, ship's carpenter, the one that works on the Discovery. But his son, Andrew Powrie, is a tailor. So that is the Andrew Powrie in Dundee. So this is getting a bit weird now, all these interconnections, and I still haven't got to the polo. This is a supplement to the Courier and Advertiser from May 1936, and it gives you an idea of the range of work the Caledon shipyard and engineering company took part in. There's a list of the recent contracts for steel work and for shipbuilding, and it tells you the type of things that they built as high-class passenger and cargo ships with steam or diesel engines, and ferry steamers and pontoons, etc., etc. So a large concern. As I've mentioned before, Archibald started his apprenticeship at Gourlay's of Dundee. Now, if you're interested in shipping in Dundee, I can recommend these two brochures, which are booklets rather, which are free to download at the Abertay Historical Society. And just as an aside, the Abertay Historical Society was set up in the year that Archibald Powrie took on the role of Lord Provost of Dundee. Sadly, Archibald Powrie took ill late in 1948 and died in January 1949. He was 64 years old. There was a large procession in Dundee. There are lots of newspaper accounts of the funeral, but I just want to point out that 4 ship's platers, his workmates from the Caledon shipyard, carried his coffin to the grave. The pallbearers were his wife, his brother William Powrie, his brother-in-law William Russell, his other brother-in-law, my great-grandfather James Russell, Henry Main, Andrew Powrie, Archibald's uncle, who was the tailor, and Councillor A.J. Bain. Like most people, I'm always looking for connections in family history. So when the 1921 census came out, I checked where everybody was working. So in 1911, my grandfather, James Christie Russell, was in Arbroath still, but by 1921, he and the rest of the family were living in Dundee, and his oldest brother, David, was working at the Caledon shipyard. Well, I went to look for William Wallace Russell, my grandfather's uncle, Georgina's brother. He was still at home with his mother, and he too was working at the Caledon shipyard. Then I found Archibald Powrie, and he too was, as you would expect, working at the Caledon shipyard. Now, if I look back to 1901, I found all these people that I've been talking about are living within 3 streets of each other: Lilybank Road, Watson Street, and Broughty Ferry Road. So on Lilybank, we've got David Russell, the shipwright, Georgina Millen's father, and we've also got Andrew Powrie, Archibald Powrie's grandfather, also a shipwright. On Watson Street, we have the odd man out, James Christie Russell, my great-grandfather. He didn't go into the shipbuilding industry. He became a grocer, and he's left Lilybank Street and moved over here with his new wife, Mary Davison Fullerton, to live in Watson Street. Now, Mary Davison Fullerton's mother and her brother are also living at Watson Street, but not at the same address. And of course, on Broughty Ferry Road, we've got Archibald Powrie and his father, David Powrie, both ship's platers. Now, in this image from 1927, you can clearly see the 3 streets where the families lived. And they're just nestled right here. So close to the docks, I can just imagine Georgina walking down to the docks with her dad's packed lunch in the summertime. So I've looked at Archibald through the prism of his work and how that relates to other members of the family, and housing and where they lived and how that relates to the family. So I go back to see if there's any connection with Archibald's polo and swimming career. Now, the first thing I can find on Archibald is from 1929, or the first item that I find is from 1929, and it's a photo of past polo players at a Dundee gala. And Archibald is the man with the moustache in the back row on the right-hand side. So that's the first picture I've seen him as a polo player. Now, I found many articles on Archie and on his swimming and polo career, but when I found this article from 1909, I got really excited, because not only did it have a picture of Archie in his younger years, but it also had the picture of the captain of the Whitehall Swimming Club in Dundee, and the captain was no other than William Wallace Russell, Archibald's brother-in-law. So now we have connections, family connections, work connections, and swimming connections. Not only that, the headline reads, Whitehall Swimming Club hard hit by bad trade. And it goes on to say that the bad trade is they're going to lose 2 of their best players, William Wallace Russell and Archibald Powrie, to Austria for about 6 months, because both these men are going out to run a ship construction course in Trieste. Now, when Archibald and William Wallace Russell were swimming for Whitehall, the swimming baths probably looked like this. This is a picture from 1980, and if you know Dundee, and the old baths are right down by the swim baths were right down by the docks. By 1910, Dundee's swimming baths had been greatly improved. A new pool for women had been installed, plus another first-class pool. But I have to read you this. It says, only those who've been in the underground tunnels can adequately appreciate what has been done in the planning of a perfect water supply and the retaining of the same in the state of the highest possible purity. The network of intertwining piping is a testimony to the engineering skills of those responsible, while the provision of an aerating and filtering plant in addition to the ordinary sand filter beds speaks for the foresight of those in charge of the work. In fact, everything has not only been designed to make indoor bathing comfortable, attractive and safe, but to ensure the expansion of this important public health works on the soundest lines. So it was supposed to be the best swimming baths, they say, in the country at this time. This is another image from Britain from the air, which shows in the top left-hand corner where the little red dot is, the 3 streets where my relatives lived. And the other dot on the right-hand side is where the Dundee swimming baths were. So out of your house, across your workplace, and into the swimming baths. Okay, by now I'm convinced my grandfather must have got into swimming because of Archibald Powery and his uncle and his other uncle, William Wallace Russell. So I start looking for some evidence that he ever swam in the Tay. Now, he's probably in the same club, the Whitehall, so that made it a bit easier. So I started in 1928, and I found this long distance swim in the Tay, and it names the 7 entrants, and among the entrants is a James Russell, my grandfather. So did he win it in 1928? Well, the Tay long distance swim of the Midlands came off successfully at Newport's Gala on Saturday. 5 competed. H. Phillip and J. Russell did not take part. Well, he certainly didn't get one of those cups in 1928. Okay, so I'll go back another year to 1927 and just mention here that if you wanted to take part in the Tay race, you had to provide your own boat and oarsmen so that if you got into trouble, they could get you out of the water. Everybody had to do that. So there was only 4 people who took part, and it does mention the only person with previous experience in this race was James Russell. So now I know he took part before 27 as well, but maybe this was his year. Maybe he won it this year. So I go on to read, it lists who the 4 are, but it then goes on to say Russell gave up early because of the effects of the cold. So 1927 was not his year either. So I try going back to 1926, because he must have competed before, maybe it was this year, and he'd be about 20 at this time. So it says in the article that the swimmers gave up one after the other, so this isn't looking very good. Until 100 yards west of Newport Pier, only 3 remained: Bain, Russell and Crammond. At this point, Bain, who'd swum well out into the river, was about 20 yards on the lead, while Crammond led, and Whitehall man, that was B. Russell, by about 5 yards. The latter 2 gave up practically together, and Bain went on to finish alone. So he didn't win then either. So he didn't win in 26, 27 or 28. So ironically, the first photo in the press that I find of my grandfather's swimming career is when it lets me know he's going to be leaving Whitehall for 6 months to go to Lockerbie. I have absolutely no idea if he went to Lockerbie or what he was doing in Lockerbie, but he was leaving Whitehall, and so was W. Smith, because he was moving to Durban, South Africa. Well, if my grandpa went to Lockerbie, he was soon back in Dundee, because in June that year, the Whitehall team made history by annexing the Balrodry Shield team race for the 7th year in succession. In the time of 2 minutes 21 seconds, roughly 28 seconds per member. The team was Reynolds, Ferguson, Russell, Penny and Cameron. Russell is the only one of the original team of 7 years ago when he went off first. So still in 1930, we'll go from the Shield to the Tay Swim. And this is the winner of the Tay Swim that year, a J.G. Ferguson, and this is the 2nd time he's won it. But it goes on to say that the person who came in 2nd was James Russell. So in 1930, my grandfather came in 2nd in the Tay Swim. I must say that that cup that J.G. Ferguson is holding is about 3 or 4 times bigger than the 2 wee cups my grandfather had. Now, by 1933, I think the days of swimming the Tay were over for my grandfather, as he got married to my gran that year. His occupation is down as house joiner, something he worked at all his life, and she was down as a jute weaver. Now, I do have some newspaper articles that would indicate he kept on refereeing polo events for Whitehall, but I don't think he took part in competitive swimming after 1933. This is my final object, a medal from the Dundee Humane Society, which was awarded in 1868 to William Fullerton for saving 2 men from drowning near the castle at Brodie Ferry. He is the father of Mary Davison Fullerton, who is the woman holding the baby in the picture, and is married, or was married, to my great-grandfather James Christie Russell, and is obviously the mother of my grandfather James Christie Russell. Now, William Fullerton died quite young, at age 45 in 1883, and at that time and before, he was living in Watson Street, the street that Mary Davison Fullerton and my great-grandfather lived on once they got married. So all these people are living together close by. And of course, he could swim, but that's not the link here. When he died, there was a tribute to him in a few of the newspapers, but one of these, from the Courier, I think, is Monday afternoon, there was conveyed to the Eastern Necropolis in Dundee the mortal remains of William Fullerton, boat builder for upwards of 20 years, in the employment of Messrs. Gourley, Brothers and Co. So he worked in the same place as Archibald Powery did his apprenticeship. He was a good workman, a kind and gentle companion, and one thoroughly beloved by his fellow workmen. He was an enthusiastic boating man, and having saved several persons from drowning, he was awarded the Dundee Humane Society Silver Medal and Parchment in the year 1968. He was also a keen sportsman, and many of the specimens of birds from the Tay that now grace the walls of the Dundee Natural Society and Museum were his gifts. As a last mark of respect that could be paid to him, the manager and heads of department in Camperdown Shipyard, as well as some of the foremen from the other shipyards, attended the funeral. Thanks for listening. I hope you found that of interest. I'm just putting up this web address here in case you find my page of links of use. It definitely has a northeast bias, but everything I've referred to today, including the Aberdeen Historical Society, can be linked through to.